Welcome to the New Level Podcast, everyone. My name is Phil, and I'm your host on the show. And on today's episode, we speak with Elizabeth Sinclair, who's the marketing director at Bartender, a software from Seagull Scientific. So this company transforms data into the labels, barcodes, documents, and RFIDs that drives businesses these days. Elizabeth works with users, partners, and industry groups in sectors such as food, pharma, medical devices, chemical, and healthcare, with the goal to enable consumer confidence, supply chain efficiencies, and regulatory compliance through deployment of AIDC, also known as automatic identification and data capture. So on today's episode, we speak about trends in the label software industry. We talk about everything from new technology to labeling regulations being implemented by companies like Amazon. And Elizabeth shares tips on how to adopt this software in your business and ensure that you're making the best out of the investment in your digital transformation. So lots to learn on today's episode, guys. Without further delay, I bring you Elizabeth Sinclair.
You are listening to the New Level Podcast, where humans talk about automation. We bring you industry experts and share new ideas that help elevate your business. Join your hosts, Philip Agib and Teresa Foreman, on the journey of automation technology.
Welcome to the New Level Podcast, everyone. So on today's episode, we have Elizabeth Sinclair here from Bartender, which is a software by Seagull Scientific. And I'm always joined by my awesome co-host, Teresa.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you again.
And so welcome, Elizabeth, to the podcast.
It's really nice to be here with you today. I'm excited for this.
So are we.
We're excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. So we'll just jump into the first question that we have here for you, Elizabeth. So most of our audience is in the tech industry, but some of them don't necessarily interact with, the production teams and the warehouse teams, where we see a lot of the labels that we have, in the supply chain. So can you help our audience understand the importance of labels in the supply chain and where to find them?
Sure. So labels actually make the world go round, at least in my world, and probably in everybody else's world. It's a little thing that you never think of, but it's mission critical all the way from the supply chain, from manufacture all the way through to end use. I like to start with a simple example that I think everybody can understand. You go to your neighborhood deli, and you ask for a kilogram of roast turkey, and they take that turkey and they place it on the weighing scale. So, okay, we know how much the turkey weighs. We have the price per pound somewhere, but all that different data, including a barcode that you can scan at the cash register, all has to go on that label. Where does it come from? So, sometimes it's allergen data that goes there. Sometimes it's ingredient information. It could even be a recipe. So there are a lot of different things going into this variable data, dynamic data, if you will. So let's scale that up a little bit or a lot to say aerospace manufacturing. So I don't know if you're aware, but Boeing and Airbus don't make giant airplanes. They take a collection of component parts and, well, they don't mash them together, but they do assemble them to make a giant airplane, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have component manufacturers all over the world. In fact, there's some pretty cool applications that I'm hearing about sending CAD files over to Asia for 3D printing of the parts and including an RFID tag in them. Anyway, so, they're assembled where the expertise is and where the price is right. So an airplane, there's a lot at risk inside an airplane, right? There's human life that's in its care every day. And so it's important that all the parts, that we're able to track where the parts came from, who manufactured them, when they manufactured them. Labeling contains all that data so that the parts can be appropriately assembled and then not only tracked throughout the supply chain, but tracked throughout the 30-year life of a commercial airliner. We also see labeling is important, if you go to your pharmacy, you get a box that has a little 2D colorful barcode. That's a way to trace what's in that medication, where it was made, how it was made, in case there's a recall. So, what we're talking about here, we might talk a little bit about the UPC label that's on your can of Coca-Cola, which is a static barcode, a static label. But we're mostly going to be talking about dynamic labeling here. It's right now, it's the holidays. And so the FedEx guys are really busy. Each one of those labels has dynamic data and variable data in barcodes and addresses and all that stuff. So that's labeling is mission critical, and it really does impact everyone's life, not just mine.
That's fascinating. It's
probably
absolutely
one of those things, Elizabeth, sorry, Phil, it's probably one of those things that is so ubiquitous and it's everywhere we turn and we just don't even see them anymore. Do you know what I mean? Because they're on everything.
Right. Well, and another thing that's, I think, germane to this conversation today is the data carriers. So, of course, there's alphanumeric human readable text. But when we start talking about this kind of labeling, we're talking about auto ID, which is things like barcodes, 2D barcodes, QR codes, long barcodes, short barcodes. And particularly exciting right now is RFID, which is exactly the same thing as a barcode, except you listen for it with a scanner. And with barcodes, you look for it with a scanner. So I'm excited to talk about that a little bit too.
I like that distinction you made. I've been around a while, so I remember when RFID came out, and it was just so people were like, "Well, where is it? I can't see it." And you're like, "No, it's in this magical thing called the air." So I like that distinction you're making between the readable versus the hearable.
Well, for sure. And, I know that every year for the past 20 years has been, this is the year of RFID, but I think it's finally coming true. I think we're there now. I think it's being adopted, and people are doing super exciting things with it.
Yeah, I think for a long time, it was a technology in search of a use case, right? For a long time. And I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. The technology was ahead of how we were going to use it.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and so while we're talking about RFID, one of the questions we wanted to ask for our audience is, what are those trends that we're seeing in the supply chain labeling process, right? There's also, I'm guessing, new standards that are being implemented. There's also, specific industries that might be adopting them early or a little bit later. And all kinds of new technologies coming out. So talk to us about sort of what's happening in the space.
Okay, so I apologize in advance because I get really geeked out about this and I may get a little overexcited. But boy, are we seeing interesting things right now in item level ID. So what is that? We're all familiar with the UPC code. Every can of Coke you buy everywhere in the world has that same code. Coca-Cola buys that number, that barcode from GS1, the Global Standards Organization. And that's just a way for everywhere you go in the world, if you buy a can of Coke, they're able to track it back to, where it was made and what it is and have consistent pricing, et cetera. So the thing about the UPC, though, is it's static for an entire SKU. So if I went and bought a candy bar at my local store, the package is identical globally. Item level ID takes that idea of a UPC a giant step further. So if, for example, if you bought a can of Coca-Cola, you went to the case and you pulled a can of Coca-Cola, item level ID would have an individual code on that, per unit, per item, so that can of Coke would have a different code on it than the can of Coke sitting right next to it.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
that is very cool.
And so, it's interesting to me that there are a bunch of drivers coming together to enable this. Because if you think about it, how much infrastructure does it take to track every single CPG by unit in the world?
Yeah.
But industry consultants say within the next few years, this item level marking and serialization is just going to be expected by consumers. The trends driven by three environments: tech, consumer, and brand. First, the tech. So smartphones are everywhere. You and I carry in our pockets a computer that has more power than powered the Apollo moon missions. By the way, that was 33,000 bits of RAM powered the Apollo moon mission. And our phones have about 4 trillion bits in it. That's about 7 million times more. So we've got that infrastructure. A good example of this is there's a local tech company, a startup here in the Seattle area. They're doing really well. They're achieved unicorn status, which means they have $1 billion valuation. It's called Convoy. It was started by some Amazon alums, one in particular. It's an app for truckers. So it's so that, outbound loads were always easy for truckers to find. Inbound loads, not so much. Sometimes they came back empty. They had to be on the phone with a broker. So this matches truckers with loads wherever they are. And I saw the founder, who's super smart, as you'd expect, talk about this at a conference a few years ago. And what he said was that he'd had the idea for this for a decade. He knew this was going to be a thing, but it wasn't until the price point of smartphones came down low enough that every trucker in North America would have one in his cab that this business model became viable. So there's that. There's also, now we have electronic and data infrastructure capabilities that support managing the vast amounts of data that this is going to take. For non-tech drivers, consumers are an unusual kind of animal. We're different than we used to be. Social theorists like to talk about the thin interface. And so what that means is the distance between the consumer and information is thinning. There's less in between the source and the recipient. So we like the ability to get our own information when and where we want it. For example, here in the US, when I was a kid, my parents watched the nightly news every day. We received our information about the day's events from a centralized source, a trusted source. Now, every morning, I roll over in bed and I boot up my iPad and I go to my news aggregator of choice. And I read only the happy stories, or at least that's what I try to do. But I control how I receive information and what information I receive. So if you want a place to stay in a foreign city, not long ago, you'd pick up the phone and call a travel agent who would find a hotel in the right neighborhood, right price. Now, in the before times when we could still travel, you pull up your Airbnb app on your smartphone, you take care of it yourself. The thin interface, though, also applies to things like nutrition information. Consumers want to know everything about what they put into their bodies and into their families' bodies. Access to complete allergen information saves lives. And people also want to know about provenance. We don't want computers built with conflict minerals. We don't want to commit to the love of our lives with a blood diamond. And we want to know that our food is ethically sourced. Here in the Pacific Northwest of the US, we joke about wanting to know the name of the chicken on our dining table. But, we actually do want to know it lived a healthy life and was well cared for. So the third environment, and I'm about to take a breath, I promise, driving this is brands. So with the decentralization of information we've been talking about, brands are looking for a way to control the conversation. So a Harvard Business Review published a study that said that while consumers and businesses used to rely on salespeople as trusted advisors, most decisions are made now before the consumer or business even contacts the vendor. They do internet research. So brands find this terrifying. Have you seen some of this stuff on social media?
Yep.
My goodness. So for brands, the ability to select and disseminate product information gives them the ability to regain control of the conversation. And they're operating in a world that's thinking about labeling in new ways. So the US FDA has said that web pages accessed by human readable or auto ID are considered an extension of the label. And real estate on the label is precious. So being able to meet regulatory requirements for information, as well as things like allergen information, is key here. So now I'll take a breath.
Today's episode is sponsored by Vantry Systems in partnership with Bartender, Seagull Scientific. Vantry allows you to customize your label requirements for each advanced shipment notice sent to your trading partners. For all your EDI and API automation needs, visit www.vantry.com for more information. Now, back to the show. Wow. I would have never thought that. I mean, obviously, with all the digital transformation that we're seeing, the labeling industry must be changing. I'm completely fascinated by this idea of like item level ID. Like, man, where is this information being stored? I mean, obviously it makes sense, especially as people are more conscious about, what products they're consuming, where is it coming from? Like, that information needs to be available for the consumer. But like, man, to recall a product and know exactly which one or from which ID to which ID, the batch, which batch was affected by it. I mean, that's fascinating, and it's really impressive.
Yeah, it's getting so granular, right? And to your point, like, when digital transformation started and big data started, everybody was so overwhelmed going, why do we possibly need to know all this information about where this pencil came from or where, you know what I mean?
Right.
And somewhere the switch flipped and everybody's like, I want to know everything. I want to know
exactly
absolutely everything about this pencil. And to Phil's point, it's like, that all that data requires storage. And if you think about, the supply chain from tip to stern, like that's an incredible amount of data. And when you get down to like lot numbers and, it's not just that one pencil, right? It's the millions of pencils. And how do you get down to that one single pencil and where that came from? Or Elizabeth, the example you gave around allergens, right? Particularly food allergens that can be life-threatening. I mean, absolutely, you want to know everything about that cookie, right? And where it came from, and is the supply chain honest? And like, what are some of these ingredients I can't even, pronounce, and are any of them anaphylactic? And so, I think it's just something we take for granted as consumers. And then that's why I love, these podcasts. We talk to people like you, and I learn so much. And, it just opens up a whole other world that, the consumer base in general just isn't aware of.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about our current environment. Let's talk about the COVID vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer and soon to be AstraZeneca. Each one of those vials has lot number, production number. I'm not certain, but I would guess that at the case level, and I hear for the one that needs to be stored, at super cold temperatures, that it comes in a pizza box size container. The vials do that contains 790 vials of the vaccine. My guess is that has a read-write kind of RFID tag on the case level. So it's communicating temperature information throughout the supply chain. Wow. I know that, we talk about, why do people keep talking about Bill Gates and the vaccine? Well, it's because, his Gates Foundation has been distributing vaccines throughout sub-Saharan Africa for the last, 10 or 12 years. And one of the first problems that they encountered was it's hot there. Vaccines degrade under temperature. How are they going to know when something has, reached the point where it's dangerous? So there's a system. There's green means it's been kept at temperature. There's yellow, meaning that it might have dropped into a higher temperature than storage. And then there's red, which means it spent too long in a high temperature and needs to be discarded. So, I assume that since this vaccine is so mission critical to human existence, that they're using a very similar kind of transmitting RFID tag on that.
So that would fall under, obviously, the dynamic control, right? The dynamic data.
Yes.
And I think that's the part that's really fascinating. The static data is something. I think it's been around for a little bit longer, but it's this idea that a label can be dynamic, that could provide dynamic data. That to me is absolutely fascinating. And the example you gave about the vaccine, it's like so important. Like if that wasn't there, people might be, administering a vaccine that isn't supposed to be given, and that can cost lives.
Yep. Well, and the good news, I mean, at least what's reassuring to me is that this has been done before. So that label probably, or the case probably doesn't also only have the broadcasting RFID chip, but it's also each one of those vials is individually marked. That's the dynamic data that the label carries, so it can be tracked from where it came. When you get your vaccine, they're going to record that number, and that'll be associated with your health records. So if there's a recall, they can say, oh, wow, some people got sick and they were on this lot. Let's go contact everybody who got that lot. So it is important. Getting back to the more commercial, the more CPG. And by the way, CPG stands for consumer packaged goods. I don't know if I was throwing out an acronym that people weren't familiar with, but I want to make sure that's understood. So right now, there are several organizations that are working to implement item level ID standards, because, I mean, really, if everybody's using their own item level ID taxonomy and syntax, then everybody's speaking a different language, and you don't have interoperability in the supply chain. So the two most prominent and well-developed schema now, though, are GS1, as you would imagine, with their digital link, and then not a standards organization, but an 800-pound gorilla that we're all familiar with called Amazon, that they're trying to become a bit of a standards organization with their transparency program. So transparency was originally designed to protect brands and sellers and buyers from counterfeiting. Manufacturer submits information to Amazon, including their vendor code, UPC, number of items to be produced, and then Amazon sends over a CSV file with randomly serialized non-sequential 26-character identifiers, one for each package. And then software like Bartender encodes each ID in that CSV file into a 2D data matrix barcode, which is included on the package. It's affixed to the package either directly or on a sticker. Then the manufacturer scans each one with a special app, and it sends that data back to Amazon, so it can be tracked by both Amazon and the consumer through the supply chain, right? So Amazon knows what stickers on every product, and then the consumer downloads also an app, and when they see a product, they buy it through Amazon, they scan it with their smartphone and they get the provenance or nutrition information or manufacturing information or allergen information. So, but what Amazon has done that I think is really interesting here is, in order to make this program successful, every item that carries a transparency tag, every UPC, every item on that UPC has to be individually marked. So if you sell, say you sell vitamins through the Amazon marketplace, well, it makes sense that would have the item level code for transparency. But if you sell that same UPC at Walgreens or CVS or a Kroger store, it also has to have the transparency code on it. So all of a sudden, this becomes a huge global deal. They've onboarded, I think they're up to 4,000 brands in Asia. They made incursions into Canada, not the summer of 2020, but the summer of 2019, as well as starting to make incursions into Europe. And we're hearing from our European partners that they're selling a lot of Bartender for transparency. So, they're not a standards organization, but they play one on TV. They're poised to really take over this space because everyone wants to sell on Amazon, right? And then the other standard that I feel a little bit excited about, actually, just because they GS1 brought us in at the beginning. And by the way, we've also been working with Amazon since the beginning, because they're our neighbors. They're just across the lake from us, and they knew where to find us when they wanted to deal with variable data. Is the digital link standard. And so digital link URLs can be accessed through a scanner on a smartphone, or in some cases an app. So the beauty, though, of digital link is the data returned to the user is contextual. Now let's talk about dynamic data. This is a dynamic web-enabled code that refers the user to different data, depending on things like location, campaign, time zone, demographics, even how it's accessed. Is it accessed via an app, via a browser? So let's see, a consumer who scanned a box of rice would likely see provenance, nutrition, ingredient information. They might also see a recipe or a coupon for a discounted price. An Australian customer or a Canadian customer, a consumer, would see the recipe in metric system measures and the coupon in Canadian currency, while an American consumer would be delivered that content in English measures and US dollars. So, okay, but it gets more exciting, right? So then you're a retailer and you scan that very same code. You wouldn't see any of that. You might see a lot number, a calendar for discounts and promotions on the product, maybe even planograms so you can display the boxes of rice in a brand approved manner. A logistics provider or warehouse could scan that very same code and access handling information or hazard information. Although rice isn't terribly hazardous, many CPGs like cleaning products really have the potential to be. Disparate things like rewards, care instructions, product registration, even POS UPC data that could eventually eliminate the need for a separate UPC code. And GS1 isn't actually saying that that's their end goal, but most of us believe that that's their end goal, is to have only one on-pack code, and that the digital link code will replace that because it can do everything, right? And so everything that needs to be delivered, every bit of information can be delivered through one item level on-pack code. How exciting is that?
That's pretty exciting. And that's quite an undertaking, actually, at that level.
And it seems pretty future facing, but the fact of the matter is that digital link is out in the wild and being used pretty successfully. It's one of the, to me, barcodes are 40-year-old technology. They're not very sexy, but by finding interesting applications and how data and infrastructure hook up to these barcodes, to the data carriers, that's where the exciting stuff is here.
So I have a question for you, Elizabeth. It's a bit of a good segue. You're talking about, just blowing my mind anyways about all the things that have to be considered, like the minutia. It's incredible. And so what the business brain in me is going, well, that sounds like a really expensive investment for companies that need to either even just get to the standard, let alone get past the standard. So what technology, I'm interested in hearing what technologies you're seeing companies invest in order to do everything you've just described in the supply chain, in the distribution, their distribution processes.
Well, and it goes beyond distribution and supply chain. I mean, I've spoken with ER nurses who get a medical device and it's got like 47 different barcodes, and in the heat of the moment, they don't know which one to scan. So, if you can eliminate any question about where the information is and how to access it, then you enable critical care to be delivered more quickly. So it's, and we're also seeing it a lot in luxury apparel because people want to know that their Louis Vuitton purse is actually Louis Vuitton and
not a knockoff.
Right, and not Lou Vincent or something. I don't know. So technology, let's work backwards. At the end of the item level ID chain is the consumer. We've talked about the key role that smartphones play. and enabling the consumer to easily access product data. But before the item makes it to the shelf, the code needs to be printed on its label. We've got technology that's really good at item level direct marking. For example, use by dates and lot numbers, right? But creating a machine readable code creates a tougher challenge. For a run of thousands of commercial items, the ability to include a readable code on the prime label at speed, say using a flexo press, it's not so easy. But this is the eventual goal, that all CPGs will have item level ID of one standard or another intrinsic to the prime label on the product. And the prime label is the colorful label that has the markety branding stuff on it. For now, many smaller brands are printing the code on stickers and putting it on the packaging. For companies that use this method, though, having impeccable processes and executing them impeccably is key to success, because once you start having a sticker and getting, you introduce the opportunity for error, human error, and otherwise. And so, it's interesting, when we worked with Amazon, they were thrilled that they onboarded all these brands in China, but they were not so thrilled about the sticker. And so what we worked with them to develop was an in-plant process to print those things and to have them and use label applicators to get them directly on there, to include them in the prime label, to integrate with the flexo printing process. The labelers understand that they have data that they need to print, and so they need a printer. But it's not often until after they've chosen the printer that it strikes them, I also have data I need to get there, but how am I going to get, what's the middle piece between the data and the printer? So label software like Bartender connects the variable data in the database to the printer. When our customers design their label, they don't put the data there, they put a variable data field that makes a call to the data. Just like in the deli, making a call to the pricing database and calculating the barcode. So it populates the dynamic data field so that by sending one label file to the printer, multiple labels, each with its own code, can be printed on one run.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Very interesting.
It sounds like there's a lot that companies need to think about when they're looking at their labeling processes, and it's good to hear that Bartender can help them out with that. I do have a question about I guess the way that the labeling industry is going to affect the job market, right? Because we're talking about RFID, we're talking about digital transformation, and this. On this podcast, we like to talk about, how is all this automation, how is all this technology going to affect us humans? And I feel like soon enough, and we're seeing this in the Amazon warehouses with the robotics being involved, obviously warehouse workers, we're hearing warehouse workers are working super hard, but at the same time, what are they being compared to, So talk to us about how this digital transformation, specifically in the labeling world, is going to affect these warehousing jobs.
So it's a hard question. And, I think, I don't know if I'm sure you are aware that some people are floating the idea of a universal basic income because the robots are going to take all our jobs. Do I believe the robots are going to take all our jobs? No, because I think it's important. I mean, there are some things like I'm really glad that I don't have an accounting degree, because to my mind, that's something that technology can do really, really well. I think for something like we're always going to need neonatal nurses, because human beings need to be touched. So, what's in between that spectrum of, neonatal nurse and accountant? I don't know. I think we're all, we're going to shift the way, though, that we think about technology. And, the dream is that, we'll all have more time for leisure. I don't know if that's the case. Sometimes I I get a little frightened, not for myself, but because I'm old, but for my kids and my new granddaughter, I get a little concerned about, what their world is going to look like. But, we've always been really good. We're human beings. We've adapted to new things. So what I'm seeing that's really interesting right now is we're in a time of economic downturn, and my company is having a fantastic year. It's, we battened down the hatches and prepared for, the worst, to ride out a terrible storm like a lot of tech companies did. But what we found is this really parallels what happened in 2008, the recession. Companies look to invest in automation technology. They take the opportunity of the slower paced business environment to start reassessing systems and plan for and invest in the future. So right now, what we're seeing is, AI and robotics are really cool. And I have one of our program managers is always keeping me up to date on what's happening on the AI, and it's really, really exciting. It doesn't really dovetail at this point with our world too much. I mean, except from the angle of maybe vision systems for manufacturing. But companies are looking, they are looking at the big things like AI and robotics, but they're really looking at the ground level, where it starts, how they can make the way they handle their data more efficient, and leverage the power of existing proven technologies like RFID and barcodes. And so I think as companies look to be more efficient, those big splashy initiatives, they're going to come. They're going to come in the next few years when the world gets right again. But for now, people are they're going down to a really, really granular level and figuring out how they can fix what's at the base of what they do.
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. We're seeing the same thing at Vantry. People are taking this time to integrate their trading partners even more. They're looking at, like you said, to bridge the gap between processes in order to be able to support whatever there's to come in the future. And it's an exciting time for companies in the technology industry. And I hope that, like you said, humans will evolve and make the best out of it.
And I think, the whole AI conversation and what's that going to mean to, are the machines going to take over? What's that going to do to the economy? I think you touched on, the neonatal nurses and whatnot. There's still also a lot of data that shows that some jobs, some jobs you really need to have a human doing, but even in jobs where automation can take over, where businesses are going to continue to differentiate is like, how do they add that human element to it, right? That human touch, like, something that's very transactional and commoditized. You probably don't, care whether that was just handled by a machine or AI or whatnot, but people still want to do business with people. Right. And so, I think humans are going to evolve, and the way we do business is going to evolve.
Yep. And right now in particular, it's a time of dynamic change in the supply chain. COVID-19 has made us reassess everything. Online shopping, we always knew there was going to be an increase on how online shopping adoption happened among consumers, but we're seeing a hockey stick. It's right. Unexpected. It's stratospheric. It's really accelerated what we assumed was going to take a decade to happen. Stresses to the supply chain. They've made companies rethink that just-in-time, offshore, and lean manufacturing piece, right? We have several customers that manufacture toilet tissue, right? Their facilities are tooled one of two ways: to make toilet tissue for commercial use or for consumer use. And so, very few people are out using commercial toilet paper. We're all at home. And this is one of the predicates for the shortages early on, is that the systems need to be retooled. Restaurants are closed. You can get great deals on really nice wine, from what I hear, because they're not going to the restaurants, which is a nice to have. But early on, the big issue with dairy farmers is cows have to be milked. The milk was going into production for institutional use. The lines are tooled for giant containers, not small consumer level containers. So that's changed that a little bit. And from a consumer standpoint, consumers used to be really brand loyal, and COVID-19 finds that they're not necessarily so brand loyal anymore. They choose what's available rather than what they're accustomed to. And they expect they can get it on the same day by using their cell phone, maybe even within the hour they can get it. So, one thing, and I think this is what you were driving at, Phil, is that the digitization of the supply chain seems like it would really reduce the need for personnel. But the fact is, this rapid shift in how consumers think about shopping and online ordering means there's a need for more, not fewer workers at this time. And the thing about the worker of today and going forward is they're going to have to be lifelong learners and intellectually nimble, because roles are going to change. They're going to be able to need to use new technologies as they're developed.
So Elizabeth, you mentioned earlier, there are a lot of companies, either being involved in the standards creation, like Amazon is an example. Also, a lot of regulations, I'm sure, for all the reasons, there are regulations around a lot of these types of industries. So interested in hearing what label regulations are you seeing in which industries, and which type of industry, which type of company is adopting the most advanced label template technology? And how can companies that aren't there yet, how can they get on board like easier and more quickly?
Okay, starting from the end first, my company has been doing what we do for a very, very long time. We've been around for 35 years almost, and we've been watching as the landscape has been shifting and adopting. We've been helping industries like, again, aerospace adopt to the regulations that they're beholden to comply with. UDI for unique medical device identification. We've been there. Pharma, their supply chain security and traceability acts in North America, in Asia, and in Europe that we've really helped, and it's not, for us, it's not even so much industry related, although we do have that industry expertise. That's actually, I was hired to come in and learn about the different industries and how our technology could be applied to them. So that's been really cool because I learn something new every day. Right now, one of the exciting industries that we're talking to quite a bit now is the cannabis industry. This is, and congratulations to Canada for having the most impeccable federal legislation there globally. It's a wonderful thing. But we're looking at a lot of smaller players who know that they have to have a barcode. It's mandated by regulation, but it's not what they do. It's not what they're experts at. Well, the good news is there are companies like Vantry and their software like Bartender that really understand the landscape, and we've done it before. So that's, I think for industries that are floundering a bit, wondering, how they're going to meet regulations, talk to somebody who's done it before. This isn't our first rodeo. We've been there. Mm-hmm. So as far as interesting regulations now is, in the US, we have this patchwork of regulations for cannabis, and every state is different, and it makes my head hurt a little bit to think about how we help them all comply. But there are commonalities and nuances. It's more common and nuanced than it is radically different. And again, kudos to Canada for getting the provinces in and doing that work early on. So it's a very sensible approach, and everyone in Canada, the Canada cannabis industry is so easy to work with because they have a clear set of guidelines and they understand what's going on. So the U.S. they're great to work with, but not quite so easy. One of the things, though, that we're seeing now, so we know pharma and medical devices have really nailed down, and they're sort of coming to the end of the regulatory period where everybody's kind of got their stuff in line and stuff is happening appropriately. Food is the Wild West. My goodness, again, everybody wants to know everything about their food, and it's important. A recall. Deloitte estimates that the cost of a food recall, even for a small company to a large company, the average cost is $10 million US. So, I mean,
wow.
that's not insignificant. And small to mid-sized food processors and manufacturers, about 30% of them go out of business within a couple years of a recall. So it's really important. The U.S. is, we're big consumers. We're the largest consumer of the food industry, of food. We're the biggest target for the food industry. So what we see is that when FDA makes a regulation, that it becomes very applicable to what happens in Europe and in Canada and Asia, because everybody wants to sell to the US. Mm-hmm. The FDA has been talking about the Food Safety Modernization Act for a really long time, since 2011. But they've now started talking about this thing called the new era of food safety. And they really have nailed down the traceability requirements for FSMA with this. FSMA is Food Safety Modernization Act. It's Section 204. They introduced it in September. We've been involved in the public commentary sessions, and those sessions are being really driven by large manufacturers and processors. And the thing about the food industry is it's so fragmented. The medical devices and pharma, I mean, I feel like we're slowly going to one giant pharma company that that owns everything, because there's been such a period of M&A. But in food, that just doesn't happen. The other interesting thing here is that when FDA talked to pharma and medical device, they provided a very specific syntax for the data that had to go on each item, right? So that, but in the food industry, they haven't done that. So every pod, if you will, of food supply chain could quite possibly have their own way of communicating data, which means that's not interoperable with the guy next door or the guy across the geographic border. So Section 4 of FSMA, though, requires that companies be able to provide upstream data from every product that comes into a facility, downstream data for every product that leaves within 24 hours of a recall, mock audit, any kind of request from FDA. So let's think about how that works. Most food manufacturers tend to use more manual processes, again, because it's more fragmented. They've got people scanning stuff that goes into an Excel file or into a simple program. So how are you going to affect all that data and capture it within 24 hours if you're using a manual process? I mean, if the food industry were binary, if it was one product came in and then one product left, it would be an easy thing to do. But, let's talk about a lot of Atlantic pollock fished off of Newfoundland, right? It could be commingled with other catches. It could be destined to go to Japan for surimi, Norway for cat food. Some of it could stay in Canada to be processed into frozen meals. So this goes beyond production to cold chain, logistics providers, warehousers, even retailers. Everybody's going to have to be able to ID where things came from and where they went. And again, it's not just FDA that's driving this, it's consumers. Consumers want this information.
Right.
And I don't see any way to do this if you have manual processes. It's gonna have to be what we call AIDC, auto ID and data capture, barcodes, maybe NFC communication, printers, software, RFID chips. It's the only way that this is actually going to be able to be executed.
So Elizabeth, is it the consumers really then that are driving, like, the amount of data that's available? Is it the consumer consumers that are driving what they want to see? Is that what's driving the regulations, or the other way around?
Yes.
Okay, enough said.
So it's a kind of a symbiotic relationship. We see, it's interesting when it comes to these kind of initiatives. We see three ways that these regulations and standards come into play. Of course, there are the geographic regulatory bodies that say these are the rule if you want to engage in commerce in our jurisdiction, in our country. The second is industry groups who maybe for the food industry, the produce industry, they sort of smell these regulations are coming along, and they want to help influence the policy to make sure that what eventually gets decided by government is something that they can work with. So in an effort to do that, they try to jump out ahead of it and put their own standards into place that their constituents will use and abide by. And so when the regulators come along, they can say, okay, look, we're already doing this and it's working for us, and I think it will work for you. The third one, though, and it's the one with the real power, it's retailers. It's like Walmart and Amazon.
Really?
Right?
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, speaking of produce, the Produce Traceability Initiative came from, I can't remember which produce industry group, but they had actually designed a label that had certain elements on it, and it had to be formatted a certain way. And people weren't using it. It wasn't getting adopted, even though they were trying to get out ahead of this this anticipated FSMA Section 204, until Walmart decided that they would not accept a pallet of produce into any of their facilities unless it had this label on it. And so now because for producers, it's not efficient to have a series of labels. Everybody just uses the Walmart standard. Mm-hmm. And so now if you buy your corner fruit and vegetable stand, the pallets have that sticker. Kroger, Costco, and Walmart, everybody uses that sticker. And that's how that, that's what moves these kinds of adoptions.
Wow. I worked in the CPG sector once upon a time and worked with the Walmarts and the Costcos of the world. And the labeling requirement to a large degree set the standard for the industry. So right. That's their buying power, right? Like, yes, you want to do business here, this is how you're going to have to roll. Yeah.
Right. And who doesn't want to play with Walmart, right?
You get in there and it's like it's a volume dream, right? Yep. So yeah.
We're seeing the same thing on our side because, with the help of Bartender, we help customers print labels that are going to these, trading partners, the Walmarts, the Costcos, and each of them have their own label requirements. But I feel like it could be a little bit challenging sometimes. Like, I feel like some of our customers sometimes are struggling with the label requirements. Although we do help them with that. What kind of sort of best practices, Elizabeth, could you share with our audience to overcome this issue?
So I actually have thought long and hard about this. And fortunately, I know smart people who actually know the answers to this. So once I stopped thinking about it and started approaching my subject matter experts internally, I didn't have to think about it anymore. I just knew. So I'm, a little bit what I'm going to be doing right at this moment is I'm going to be reading about what they told me. I've got a list right here on my monitor because I want to make sure this is really important. So many people get labeling software and, it kind of looks a little bit like Microsoft Word, and the label looks a little bit like a PowerPoint slide. And I can put this thing on there. And what they end up doing is, rather than leveraging the power of the software, they create complexities that are expensive and end up being frustrating in the long run. So here's what's important. Enterprise label software can connect your label files to your existing data sources and then use business logic that's inside of our software to print the right variable data on the right label at the right time. Many organizations, again, they open up the program. It looks pretty intuitive, so they leverage only the design component of the software. So when they need to create a new label, they open up an existing label file, substitute the appropriate data, and then save it as a new data file. We even hear just horror stories of people emailing labels. So, you're creating this vast explosion of amount of data you have to manage. What you're doing is you're treating the label file itself as the data repository. You got data storage issues, you've got cost issues, you've got security problems. For companies that create a different label file for each SKU, shelf tag, or shipping address, what you're doing is you're creating an unmanageable pool, a library of thousands of static label designs and formats. Mm-hmm. This also it builds complexities and waste into the system. You duplicate data; it's not necessary. You can never, ever implement a single source of truth data strategy because you've got that data living on a bazillion different hard drives across your global network. So when data changes, every individual label has to be changed. It's got to be located, opened, updated, and saved. Is that possible? Probably not. So you're going to have errant labels and wrong data out there. If you have connected your label to your data source, not only do you have a single source of truth, but wow, what a change management miracle that is. Because when you have a change to the data, you just have to go to your master data and make the change there. And then that change is cascaded throughout your whole organization. So another mistake that people make is they store pallet level, case label, item level data in different label files. They often contain identical data, like package size, SKU, lot info, but in different formats, different size labels, or even RFID tags. So what we suggest is that you store them all in one file. We have a thing we call templates, which is not a template like you would traditionally think of it. Those things we call sample files. It's very confusing. But a template, you can store a number of different data styles or formats and layouts and connect all of those. The pallet label, the shipping label, the ingredient label can all be tied to the same data set so that it's all, particularly we see this in pharma and medical device. There's a thing called IFU, instructions for use is what it's called. And so if the wrong IFU gets in the wrong package, that's a real problem. But by aggregating all the different label styles in one place, so they're all pulling data from the same place, it's a great way to reduce complexity and avoid human error. So
great. Thanks for sharing those. Yeah, that's such good advice, and it's nice to know that there is a solution out there to connect. Because what's happening nowadays, and we were just talking about this, is people are taking this time right now to invest in their businesses. They're investing in digital transformation. So you've invested so much into whether that's an ERP or a big sort of business system that you're putting in place. And then now you have these label requirements that are coming from, like you said, either the consumers or regulators or the trading partners. And so it's nice to know that there's a solution out there that connects the data source with the labeling requirements and makes it easy to use. And, thanks to Bartender, that's available. And, we help a lot of customers with that as well. And it's proven to be working very well. People enjoy it, and it's sustainable. That's the most important thing, because if you're investing in digital transformation, you don't want to start, dealing with human error and not being able to scale your business. So that's amazing.
We see labels everywhere, and we never really think about how important they are. And I think I said at the beginning that labeling really makes the world go around. And when you start considering the capabilities that good labeling software can do, and how important it is to human safety, to efficiency of manufacturing, to logistics providers, it kind of boggles the mind. I came at this 7.5 years ago from the chemical industry, and there's so many things I had never considered, and it's not only am I totally geeked out about labeling and barcodes and RFID, sorry, not sorry, but I really, the impact that it has on people's daily lives, it's something I think about every single day.
Yeah,
it makes me think of something you said earlier on in the call, Elizabeth, and from my CPG days, at some point, and I grew up in Montreal, so I was dealing with, Quebec standards because there was the language stuff, and then there's the Canadian standards, and then to your point, there's when you're dealing with the Walmarts and the Costcos, there's like, what do they need, and at some point you're just pulling your hair out and you go like, when is enough already?
Right.
And so you said earlier on that that potentially BGS1's like grand plan is just to move to one basically set of standards. So I'm super curious, when you think, like, at what stage do you think we're not going to need a gun to scan labels anymore because we're going to have just gone to this one super platform?
Right. And so before I touch on that, I do want to mention, variable data can also include languages, localizations, and translations. Mm-hmm. So, if you're a brand that sells across several geographies, or you need shipping labels because you're shipping to Quebec, you're shipping to the US, you're shipping to Central America, all that data can be stored in, you just put the one variable data field in your label, and it can pull language and localization data depending on what you need. So that's pretty exciting. And actually, our latest product has Bartender 2021 has a phrase library so that you can actually store phrases and it'll do translations automatically. So we're pretty dang excited about that. But so, when are we not going to need a gun? Well, you're always going to need some kind of hardware, right? Mm-hmm. I think before we started recording, we talked about barcodes traditionally are line of sight. You see, they use lasers. We think about RFID as listening. So, Lululemon, a great Canadian athletic wear retailer, has the most impeccable RFID deployment in the universe. They're really the ones who've pushed the rest of the retail sector forward in adoption of RFID. The case study they published like 3 or 4 years ago, it just gives me little goosebumps because it's such a beautiful deployment. And they do what's called Geiger counting. So back in the back room, they have they use their listener, their RFID listener, that listens to the RFID, all the RFID tags. So the floor associates can home in on which exact package they need and where it is just by using this counter. Wow. We hear stories of this is actually in wide use now, particularly in expensive items, that as items are pushed out of the manufacturing facility into the transport method, there are interrogators on each side of the bay door that read all the RFID tags so they know where they're going as they go. So RFID is really exciting. But, right now we've just started working with a company called Digimarc. They've been around for a little bit. They're out of Beaverton, Oregon. So they are also our neighbors just slightly to the south here in Seattle. They call what they have a barcode, but it's kind of, to me, it's a barcode that works kind of like RFID in that the code it covers the entire package. You don't see it. It's the whole package. It's tiny, barely perceptible gray dots. So you can hardly see it. And cool. So for them, what they're doing particularly in the grocery space, is that same idea of having a scanner and being able to go stand in front of a refrigerator case and scan all the pizzas and know what's there and when the expiration dates are and when they should be pulled. And then also one of the interesting benefits they claim is they've actually done studies on, when you buy something and the cashier has to rotate it to find the code to scan,
right?
How much time that takes, and to just not have to find out where that code is and look for it and just zip it across the scanner. It creates tremendous efficiencies, at least in that POS space. So they're very. Do I think the scanner's ever going to go away? No, because you always are going to need something. I mean, until we all get our own scanner or RFID chip.
Yeah, how long till we're wrapped? How long till we're wrapped with a bunch of mini dots and they're scanning me every step I take?
I don't know about anybody else, but when they start giving those RFID chips out, I am first in line. I can't keep track of my office card key, right? So I just want it right there so I can beep and get in the office, my health information, my credit card. Sign me up. No more. I will never carry a purse again.
Hey, if it's going to make your life easier, why not? It seems pretty compelling, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, in all seriousness, there's been for years conversations around the ethics of chipping people, right? And what that means. And I saw this, I have a Fitbit and I was trying to figure out, I updated the software. And so, Elizabeth, I don't know if you're getting every time I go and use it, it's like, do you want to turn on your GPS so that we're following you all the time? And I'm like, I don't know. Why does my fitness app need to know, if I'm going for a run or I'm doing a workout, but why do you need to know where I am all the time? Anyways, I thought there was a bug. So I went into an online forum and I was like, well, how do I turn this off? And people are crazy. And then half the people are, I'm just making up numbers here, but there's a segment they were like, dude, who cares? Everybody knows everything about us now. Anyways, who cares? And the other segment is why does my fitness app need to know, if I'm in my bathroom or I'm at the restaurant, right. I want my privacy. But I think, it's just sort of an anecdotal story, but I'm a strategist by trade. So I'm thinking years out, it's going to be the civil debate that's going to happen around privacy. And it's also, I wouldn't necessarily say age related because ageism is, I'm less a fan of that it's more about attitude, right? Some people don't like privacy. We don't have any anymore. Who cares? And other people are exactly. We hardly have any anymore. So I'm going to hold on to the shreds that I have left. Anyways, I'm on a tangent.
No,
but,
for sure. No, and this is very germane to what's happening right now with contact tracing for COVID. So I have the app on my phone that'll let me know if I've been in acceptable range, or danger range with someone who has COVID. And so many people that I know are mortified that I've enabled that, even though it's not really pinging the network. It's creating its own Bluetooth network of so it doesn't know where I am. It just knows that I've been near people that have these things. But my take on that is wait till these people hear about Facebook. The people that are upset about it. Wait till they,
46 states that are bringing them to court. No, 46 states that have made
that. Yeah,
complaints.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
and didn't they just recommend they need to disband? They need to have some power taken from them. I think Congress just said that. Anyways,
I think that I'm a marketer, and I hate to say this. It's not the government tracking you that you need to be afraid of. It's the marketers. It's us. We know everything. People have no idea how much people know. So again, we've delved off into a very interesting and current topic, haven't we?
A discussion we can have maybe a year from now, once we have a better idea of what's going on in this world and how how we're taking care of this privacy issue. But Elizabeth, speaking with you has been an absolute blast. This has been really amazing. Learned so much.
I've learned so much.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. We wanted to give you an opportunity, though. We wanted to give you an opportunity so that you can speak to our audience and kind of share with them where they can reach you, where they can learn more about Bartender. So tell us how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. And, I am really, I'm always excited. I mean, obviously I'm excited. I apologize for some of that unbridled enthusiasm. It's a little weird, I know. But some of the new applications and trends and regulations that we've talked about, every time I speak at a conference or I do a webinar, people contact me and they have new ideas and things I've never thought of about, things I've been thinking about for a long time. So I really, Phil and Teresa, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And to those of you who have gotten this far in this podcast, I encourage you, please, to contact me if you have any ideas, if there's stuff you'd like to talk about, if you think our software can help you, we can have that conversation too. But, mostly I'm interested in your ideas. My email address is Sinclair, that's ESINCLAIR, at Seagull Scientific, and we're Seagull like the bird, seagullscientific.com. And you can find out more about our product at www.seagullscientific.com. And if you're interested in the nuts and bolts about how the product works, check support.seagullscientific.com.
Fantastic. Thank you again for taking the time out of your day.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
And we hope to have you back again soon.
Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You are listening to the New Level Podcast, where humans talk about automation. We bring you industry experts and share new ideas that help elevate your business. Join your hosts, Philip Agib and Teresa Foreman, on the journey of automation technology.